when Marcos Velasquez, a 45-year-old businessman who had just sold his tech company for €200 million, arrived at his family's estate in the hills of the Grazalema mountain range, a place he hadn't visited in 15 years. He was dragging his suitcase across the green grass in front of his grandparents' stone house. The last thing he expected to find was a 30-year-old woman holding a baby, with a 5-year-old girl clutching her skirt, both staring at him from the doorway as if he were the intruder, not them. And when the woman, her eyes filled with both terror and defiance, told him this was her home and she wasn't leaving, Marcos understood that the rest he was seeking was about to turn into something he had never anticipated. Because sometimes, destiny takes you exactly where you don't want to go, only to give you precisely what you need. If you're ready for this story, write in the comments where you're watching this video from. Marcos Velasquez hadn't been back to Andalusia for 15 years, not since he had buried his grandmother Carmen next to his grandfather Antonio in the small cemetery of Grazalema, surrounded by olive and cork oaks that stretched to the horizon like a green and silver sea under the Andalusian sun. Since then, the family estate had remained closed, guarded only by a local caretaker who handled the taxes and kept vandals away. Meanwhile, Marcos built his tech empire in Madrid, working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, sacrificing everything he had to achieve the success he had been promised since childhood. And the success had arrived, bigger than he had ever dared to dream. His startup, founded in a garage in Vallecas with 3 friends and a €50,000 loan, had become one of Europe's most innovative companies in the artificial intelligence sector. And 3 weeks earlier, an American giant from Silicon Valley had offered €200 million to acquire it. Marcos had accepted. He had signed the documents in a Madrid law firm with views of Gran Via. He had shaken hands with the new owners and then found himself in his penthouse in the Salamanca district with a bank account containing more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, and a void inside that no amount could fill. He was 45 years old. He had been divorced for 8 years. He had no children. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 25, and his 3 best friends had become business partners he only saw at board meetings. He had everything money could buy and nothing that money couldn't buy. It had been his psychologist who suggested he take a break, get away from Madrid, return to a place that reminded him of who he was before he became Marcos Velasquez, the tech genius, the entrepreneur of the year, the man who had it all. And so, one May morning, he had taken his Mercedes, driven for 5 hours on the southern highway, crossed the Andalusian hills, with their colors seemingly lifted from an impressionist painting, and finally taken the dirt road leading to his grandparents' estate. The property was exactly as he remembered it. The stone house with the red tile roof, the porch with wooden columns, the green grass stretching to the olive groves, the mountains covered in vegetation in the distance, the centuries-old cork oaks shading the path. It was a place out of time, a refuge where the modern world seemed never to have arrived. But when Marcos got out of the car and approached the house, dragging his suitcase through the grass, he saw something he hadn't expected. The door was open, and in the doorway, a young woman with her black hair pulled back in a ponytail, dressed in a gray t-shirt and jeans, was watching him, holding a baby dressed in red. Beside her, a girl of about 5 in a little blue dress hugged a doll and stared at him with big, curious, fearful brown eyes. Marcos stopped 10 meters from the door, his heart pounding, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. The woman stepped forward, positioning herself in front of the girl as if to protect her. And in her eyes, Marcos saw something he recognized immediately, because he had seen it so many times in mirrors during his most difficult years. The fear of someone with nothing left to lose, the determination of someone willing to fight for survival. And at that moment, Marcos understood that his quiet retreat in the Andalusian hills was about to become something far more complicated. The woman's name was Elena Fernandez. She was 32 years old, and her story was a catalogue of misfortunes that would have moved even the hardest heart. Marcos listened as he sat on a wooden chair on the porch while Elena remained standing in the doorway, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, the girl playing with her doll on the grass a few meters away. Elena had grown up in Ronda in a poor but dignified family. Her father was a bricklayer, her mother a seamstress. She had studied to be a nurse, found work at the hospital in Malaga, met a man who seemed like a fairy tale prince, and married him at 25. For 5 years, life had smiled on her. She had a house in Marbella, a husband, a beautiful daughter named Sofia. Then everything fell apart. Her husband lost his job, started drinking, became violent. Elena endured it for 2 years, hiding the bruises, making excuses, hoping things would improve. But when he raised his hand against Sofia, Elena found the courage to leave. She took her daughter and fled in the middle of the night, with a bag of clothes and 200 euros in her pocket. She slept in the car, in shelters for abused women, in friends' houses who took her in for a few nights. She looked for work everywhere, but no one would hire a single woman with a young child and no fixed address. She worked as a waitress, a caregiver, a cleaner, anything to survive and feed her daughter. Then she discovered she was pregnant. Her ex-husband, on the last night before she fled, had forced himself on her. Elena had thought about abortion, but couldn't go through with it. That child was innocent, and she couldn't punish him for his father's sins. Months later, Mateo was born in a public hospital in Jerez, with Elena crying with joy and despair at the same time, because now she had 2 mouths to feed and nowhere to go. It had been the parish priest of Grazalema who told her about the abandoned estate in the hills, a property belonging to a wealthy man from Madrid who never came, sitting empty year after year while people in the town struggled to find shelter. The priest hadn't told her to squat there, not explicitly at least, but he gave her directions to find it. He told her the house still had running water and electricity, and wished her good luck with a smile that said everything his words couldn't. Elena had moved into the estate 6 months earlier. She had cleaned the dust accumulated over 15 years. She had repaired what she could repair. She had planted a small vegetable garden in the back. For the first time in years, she and Sofia had a real roof over their heads, a place where Mateo could grow up safe. And now the man who owned that roof had returned with his expensive suitcase and luxury car, looking at her with an expression Elena couldn't decipher. Marcos remained silent for a long moment after Elena finished telling her story. He looked at the girl playing on the grass, so small and so unaware of the drama unfolding. He looked at the baby sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. And he looked at Elena, with her dark circles and work-worn hands, a woman who had fought every day to give her children a future. Then he got up from the chair, picked up his suitcase, and without a word, entered the house. Elena felt her heart stop. This was the end. He was going to kick her out. He was going to call the police, and she would be on the street again with 2 children and nowhere to go. But Marcos didn't call anyone. He went upstairs, entered his grandparents' old bedroom, left the suitcase on the bed, and sat down, looking out the window at the hills turning gold under the Andalusian sunset. That night, for the first time in months, he slept without taking his insomnia pills. The first few days were strange, uncomfortable, full of tense silences. Marcos and Elena moved through the house, like 2 strangers forced to share the same space, avoiding each other, speaking only when strictly necessary. Marcos spent his mornings walking through the olive groves, trying to find the inner peace that had brought him there, but his mind kept returning to the woman and the children living in his house. He couldn't understand why he hadn't kicked them out immediately. Anyone else in his place would have called the police, asserted their property rights, reclaimed what was theirs. But he hadn't. Something had stopped him. Something in little Sophia's big brown eyes. Something in the way Elena held her baby, as if he were the only thing she had left in the world. Elena, for her part, lived in a constant state of alert. Every morning she woke up expecting that day to be the one when Marcos would tell her to leave. She kept cooking, cleaning, tending the garden as if nothing had changed. But inside, she was preparing for the worst. She had already located a shelter in Seville where she could go with the children. It wouldn't be the first time she started from zero. It was Sophia who broke the ice. One morning, while Marcos was having breakfast alone in the kitchen, the little girl came in with her doll, sat down across from him, and stared at him with those big, curious eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. Sophia asked him what his name was. Marcos told her. She said her doll's name was Princess, and that she was her best friend. Then she asked if he had a best friend too. Marcos didn't know what to answer. From that day on, Sophia started following him everywhere. She accompanied him on his walks through the olive trees, asking questions about everything she saw. She showed him the flowers she picked, told him the stories she invented for her doll, asked him to play hide-and-seek with her in the large garden. Marcos, who had never had children and thought he had no ability to relate to them, found himself surprisingly at ease with this little girl. There was something in her innocence, in her pure and unconditional joy, that reminded him of a part of himself he had long forgotten. Elena watched from a distance, with a mix of gratitude and fear. She was grateful that Marcos was kind to her daughter, that he gave her time and attention, but she was afraid of what would happen when he grew tired of playing substitute father, when he decided it was time to return to his real life and get rid of the squatters occupying his property. One night, after the children had fallen asleep, Marcos and Elena found themselves sitting on the porch, looking at the stars shining over the Andalusian hills. It was the first time they were together without the children as a buffer, and the silence between them was charged with everything still unsaid. It was Marcos who spoke first. He asked why she hadn't gone to the police when her husband started hitting her. Elena replied that she had thought about it, but she was afraid. Afraid they wouldn't believe her. Afraid he would take Sophia away from her. Afraid of being alone. She said that when you're in that situation, when someone has convinced you that you're worthless, that no one will ever believe you, that everything happening to you is your fault, the hardest thing in the world is to ask for help. Marcos nodded slowly and, for the first time, told someone the truth about his failed marriage. He told how he had married at 32 a beautiful woman who loved him for who he was, and how he had slowly destroyed her with his obsession with work, his absences, his inability to be present. He told how she had left him after 6 years, not because she no longer loved him, but because she couldn't go on living with a ghost. That night, sitting under the stars of Andalusia, two people wounded by life began to see in the other not a stranger, but a mirror of their own sufferings and their own hopes. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. The weeks passed, and the estate in the Andalusian hills slowly transformed into something none of its inhabitants could have foreseen. What had begun as an illegal squatting and a forced retreat became, day by day, something that increasingly resembled a family. Marcos discovered talents he didn't know he possessed. He learned to change Mateo's diapers, something that initially terrified him, and that he now did with the ease of an experienced father. He learned to prepare the gazpacho that Sophia loved, following his grandmother's recipe he had found in an old notebook in the kitchen. He learned to fix things that broke in the old house, using the rusty tools his grandfather had left in the shed. But above all, he learned to be present. For the first time in his adult life, he had no meetings to attend, no emails to answer, no urgent decisions to make. His phone remained off for days at a time, and he didn't miss it. What he had missed for years without knowing it was precisely this: the time to live, to breathe, to simply be human. Elena, for her part, blossomed like a flower finally receiving the light it needs. The constant tension that had accompanied her for years began to dissolve. She slept better, ate better, smiled more. The children sensed the change and benefited from it. Sofia was happier, more confident. Matteo grew serene, surrounded by love and stability. One afternoon in June, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky red and orange, Marcos and Elena sat on the porch, watching Sofia chase fireflies on the grass. Matteo slept in his crib beside them, his soft breathing the only sound in the quiet of the Andalusian countryside. Marcos told Elena he had made a decision. She felt her heart race, preparing for the worst, but what Marcos said left her speechless. He told her he wanted to give her the estate. He wanted to put the property in her name so that she and the children would have a safe place to live forever. His lawyers would prepare all the necessary documents, and she wouldn't have to worry about anything. Elena looked at him incredulously, tears streaming down her face. She asked him why. Why would he do something like that for a stranger who had illegally occupied his house? Marcos was silent for a moment, searching for the right words. Then he told her that she had given him something no amount of money could buy. She had given him a family, even if temporary. She had given him a purpose, even if small. She had given him the chance to be a better person than he had been for 45 years. But Elena shook her head. She couldn't. She didn't want his charity. She didn't want to be a charity project. She wanted to be treated like a human being, not a pity case to be solved with a check. Marcos looked at her and, for the first time, truly understood who this woman was. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a supplicant. She was a warrior who had fought every day of her life for the dignity of herself and her children. And that dignity was not for sale, not even at the price of an estate in the Andalusian hills. The next morning, Marcos asked Elena to take a walk with him through the olive groves. They left the children with a neighbor Elena had met in recent months, a widow named Asuncion, who adored Sofia and was delighted to dote on little Matteo. They walked in silence for a while, following the path that wound among the century-old trees planted by Marcos's great-grandfather over 100 years earlier. The air smelled of grass and wildflowers, and the sun filtered through the olive leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. It was Marcos who broke the silence. He told Elena he understood. Understood why she couldn't accept his gift. Understood what dignity meant to her. Understood that what he was offering wasn't what she needed. Then he made her a different proposal. He told her he wanted to hire her as the estate manager, a real job, with a real salary, with a legal contract. He told her the property needed someone to care for it, to manage necessary repairs, to perhaps one day turn it into a rural bed and breakfast or an educational farm. Someone who knew the land, who loved this place, who lived in it. Elena listened without interrupting, her heart beating faster and faster. This wasn't charity. This was an opportunity. It was the chance to build something with her own hands, to give her children a future through her own work, not through someone's compassion. But there was something more in Marcos's eyes, something that went beyond the job offer. Elena felt it, sensed it in the tension of his body, in the way he avoided her gaze. She asked him what he wasn't telling her. Marcos stopped, turning toward her. For a long moment, he looked into her eyes, those dark eyes he had come to know in the months they'd spent together, those eyes that had seen so much pain and so much strength. Then he told her the truth. He told her he had fallen in love with her. He didn't know when it had happened. Whether that first night on the porch or that time he had seen her singing a lullaby to Matteo, or that time he had seen her laugh at one of Sophia's jokes, but he knew it had happened, and he knew he could no longer pretend it wasn't so. He told her he expected nothing from her, that he knew he didn't deserve her, that he knew she had every reason in the world not to trust men after what she had been through, but he had to tell her, because hiding it would be one more lie in a life full of lies. Elena remained silent for what seemed like an eternity, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Then, slowly, she reached out and took Marcos's hand. It was the first time she had touched him voluntarily, the first time she had allowed herself to be vulnerable with a man in years. She told him she felt something too, something she couldn't define, something that frightened and attracted her at the same time, but she was afraid. Afraid of suffering again, afraid of making her children suffer if things went wrong, afraid of believing in something that might turn out to be an illusion, like all the other illusions life had given her, and then snatched away. Marcos squeezed her hand and told her he understood. There was no rush. He had all the time in the world. Whatever happened between them, she and the children would always have a place at the estate, always have his respect and his protection. They walked back to the house slowly, hand in hand, two wounded people beginning to heal together. The Andalusian hills were golden under the September sun, and the Velasquez estate had never been as beautiful as it was that evening, which seemed lifted from a Sorolla painting. The old stone house gleamed after months of careful renovations, with its freshly painted olive-green shutters and abundant red geraniums blooming on the windowsills. The olive grove had been pruned and tended with the care of those who love the land, and this year it would yield its first harvest after 15 years of neglect, extra virgin olive oil that already had buyers waiting. In the back garden, Elena's vegetable patch had expanded into a truly productive garden, with raft tomatoes, zucchini, eggplants, peppers, and all the vegetables of the rich Andalusian culinary tradition. But the biggest change wasn't on the property. It was in the people who inhabited it. Sophia was now 6 years old and ran across the grass chasing a golden retriever puppy Marcos had given her for her birthday. She had named him Sol because she said he made her feel the sun in her heart even when it rained. The shy, frightened girl who had arrived at that house a year earlier had become a confident, happy child who attended school in the nearby town and told everyone about her dad, Marcos. Matteo had started walking a few weeks ago and wobbled through the house with that stubborn determination inherited from his mother. His first steps had been toward Marcos, arms outstretched, shouting a word that sounded like, "Dad," bringing tears of joy to the two adults watching him. Elena was unrecognizable compared to the exhausted, terrified woman Marcos had found on his doorstep. She managed the estate with competence and passion. She had started a small business selling organic olive oil and honey, already attracting interest from gourmet shops across Andalusia. She had learned to laugh again, to dream again, to believe in the future. And Marcos, the successful entrepreneur who had come seeking peace and found so much more, had discovered that true wealth isn't measured in millions of euros. It's measured in a child's laughter, in a baby's first steps, in the smile of the woman you love. They had married in May in a simple ceremony at the small church in Grazalema, with their neighbor Asuncion as a witness, and the whole town invited to the celebration. Elena had worn a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Marcos had thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his entire life. That September afternoon, sitting on the porch where it had all begun a year earlier, Marcos and Elena watched the children play on the grass as the sun set behind the hills. Matteo was in Marcos's arms, half asleep, and Sophia ran with Sol, trying to catch the first fireflies of the evening. Elena rested her head on Marcos's shoulder and told him she never could have imagined her life turning out like this, that when she had arrived at this house, fleeing from everyone and everything, She thought the best of her life was already behind her. Instead, it had just begun. Marcos held her, looking at his family, this improbable and wonderful family that destiny had given him. He thought of everything he had sacrificed in his life for success, everything he had lost, everything he thought he wanted. And he understood that what he had always sought, what money couldn't buy and work couldn't give, had always been there, in an old stone house in the Andalusian hills, waiting patiently for him for 15 long years until he was ready to find it. Sophia ran toward them with a firefly in the palm of her hand, her eyes bright with the wonder and awe of childhood. She looked at Marcos and her mother, at her little brother sleeping peacefully, at the dog wagging its tail happily at their feet, and said in that crystalline voice of children that this was the most beautiful family in the whole world. Marcos smiled and, for the first time in his life, completely agreed. Because he had understood that it isn't money that makes a man rich, but the love he receives and manages to give. And he finally had both. If this story has touched your heart and reminded you that the most beautiful things arrive when you least expect them, leave a mark of your visit with a like. And if you want to support those who tell stories that warm the soul, you can do so with a heartfelt thank you through the Super Thanks function down here. It means a lot to us. Okay,